Ever feel like you're just staring into a massive tangle of code, trying to figure out what on earth is going on?
Oh, absolutely. That feeling of spaghetti code, right?
Yeah,
Especially as systems get more complex.
exactly. And with so many different programming languages floating around now, just understanding the basic design can be, well, a real headache.
It really is. It affects everything, doesn't it? From just trying to get your head around a new project, to maintaining it, to actually trying to refactor it later on.
Yeah, it's like trying to renovate a house when all you have are some vague sketches instead of the actual blueprints.
That's a great analogy.
Well, today's deep dive is looking at something that might really help with that. We're jumping into automatic design pattern detection in software.
Design patterns. So the sort of reusable solutions, the common ways of solving problems in code.
Precisely. Think of them like, I don't know, well-worn paths through a complicated forest. If you can spot them, it makes navigating the whole thing so much easier.
Definitely. Recognizing patterns helps you grasp the big picture, how things connect, maybe even what the original developers were thinking. It's like having a decoder ring.
Totally. So for this, we've got 3 key research papers. They're looking at some, frankly, really cool new ways to automatically find these patterns and even optimize software designs.
Right. So the goal is to unpack how these methods work, see what's new about them.
Yeah, exactly. How they work, what makes them different, and what the payoff might be for anyone who has to deal with complex code,
Hmm.
which is pretty much everyone these days.
Okay, sounds good. Let's get into it.
So where do we start? Maybe with the problems with how things are usually done now.
Yeah, that makes sense. So a big issue, and the first paper really highlights this, is that current methods for finding design patterns are often tied to one specific programming language.
Right. Like a tool might work great for Java, but it's useless for Python or C++.
Exactly. And given that so many projects now mix languages, that's a huge limitation. You'd need like a separate detective for each language.
Not very practical.
Not at all. And it's not just the language dependence. The traditional ways of analyzing code, looking at it while it runs, that's dynamic analysis,
Mhm.
or just examining the code structure itself. Static analysis, they both have drawbacks. The papers mention this too.
Oh, so.
Well, dynamic analysis might miss things that don't happen in a specific run or the overall structure. Static analysis, on the other hand, might not capture the actual behavior, the interactions when the code is live.
Okay, so we've got language limitations
Mm.
and issues with both static and dynamic views. What's the new idea then? How are these researchers trying to get around that?
So the core idea in one of the main papers is pretty clever. They propose representing code in a totally different way. Forget the specific syntax for a moment.
Okay.
They turn code into an ordered sequence of feature-rich characters, little 3-character segments.
3 character segments. Representing code, how does that work?
Each little triplet is designed to capture key architectural and behavioral aspects. It's about abstracting away the superficial stuff.
Like variable names or comments, maybe? Things that don't change the fundamental pattern.
Exactly. You filter out the noise, but keep the essence needed for pattern detection. It tries to capture both structure and behavior in this single sequence.
Interesting. So you condense the code down to these essential little info packets. Then what?
Then comes the AI part. They use a transformer model. You've probably heard about transformers. They're behind a lot of the recent natural language processing breakthroughs.
Right, like understanding text, language models, that sort of thing.
Yes. And these models have something called an attention mechanism. It lets the model figure out which parts of that code sequence are most important, which parts relate to each other, even if they're far apart in the sequence.
So it's like teaching the AI to read the code sequence, spotting the meaningful connections, almost like finding the grammar of the design pattern.
That's a great way to put it, yeah. They're adapting techniques from understanding human language to understanding code structure and behavior represented in this sequential way.
Okay, so the big advantages here. What makes this really stand out?
Well, number one is that language agnostic aspect we talked about. Because you're converting the code into this abstract sequence before the AI sees it, the AI itself doesn't need to know Python or Java syntax.
So you could potentially use the same trained model on code from different languages just by changing that initial conversion step.
That's the idea, yeah. The researchers specifically tested this, looking at how well it works across languages. It's a potentially huge deal for projects using multiple technologies.
I can see that. A universal pattern detector? What else?
It also seems pretty resilient to noise. Minor variations in coding style, extra comments, things that aren't core to the pattern.
Because it's focused on those key 3 character features.
Right. So it's less likely to get confused by superficial differences, which hopefully means more accurate detection.
Makes sense. You mentioned the researchers also built a new data set, PyDesignNet.
Yes, that's another key contribution. They found existing datasets often had problems like the code examples weren't actually runnable, or they didn't cover all the classic Gang of Four design patterns thoroughly.
Gang of Four, the Go patterns, the standard
The
ones.
standard 23, yeah. So they created PyDesignNet with over 1,800 Python files specifically designed to represent all 23 patterns.
Hmm.
Crucially, the code is runnable.
Why is being runnable so important?
Because part of their analysis involves understanding the behavior of the patterns, which you can often only get by actually executing the code, or at least analyzing its potential runtime behavior. Some older datasets just provided static code snippets.
Gotcha. So you need to see how it acts, not just how it looks on paper.
Exactly. And they generated over 35,000 of those three-character sequences from these Python files to train their model.
35,000. Wow.
Mhm.
But wasn't getting enough training data a challenge?
It often is in machine learning. They use techniques called data augmentation, basically creating more training examples from the ones they had.
How do you do that?
Things like duplicating patterns within the data or making small controlled substitutions within the character sequences that don't fundamentally change the pattern itself. They show diagrams of how this works. It helped them build a much larger data set to train a more robust model.
Clever. Okay, so this sequence-based transformer approach sounds really promising. How does it stack up against other methods people have tried?
Well, the paper reviews quite a few. There's dynamic analysis, as we mentioned, watching the code run. There are methods using other kinds of language models like Code2Vec or Word2Vec to sort of understand code meaning.
Hmm.
Others try multi-level detection or even analyzing UML diagrams visually or using things called meta models. There's quite a history here.
So lots of different angles. What's the core difference with this new approach?
I think the main differentiator is aiming for that unified sequential representation that captures both structure and behavior in a language-agnostic way. Many other methods focus more heavily on one aspect, just structure, or just runtime behavior, or they're locked into a specific language.
Right. Trying to get the best of both worlds, structure and behavior, without the language chains.
Precisely. Dynamic analysis might miss context, static might miss runtime subtleties. This tries to bridge that gap.
You mentioned transformers and attention again. Can we break that down just a little more? Why is attention the key?
Sure. Think of the transformer reading that sequence of code characters. The attention mechanism helps it weigh the importance of different characters when looking at any single character.
Like focusing on the keywords in a sentence.
Kind of, yeah. But it's more sophisticated. It learns complex relationships. If character A is important for understanding character Z way down the sequence, attention helps the model make that connection.
Ah, okay. So it finds long-range dependencies.
Exactly. Which is crucial for design patterns because the interacting parts might be scattered across the code. They also use multi-head attention, like having several attention mechanisms looking for different types of relationships simultaneously.
Different perspectives on the same sequence.
Right. And positional encoding adds information about the order of the characters because the basic attention mechanism doesn't inherently know if something comes first or last.
Okay, so how does this help tell patterns apart? They gave an example, right?
Yes, with the proxy and facade patterns, these can look structurally similar in some ways. They both involve wrapping other objects.
Right.
But the order in which certain methods are called or how components interact is different. The attention mechanism learns to pick up on these sequential differences, assigning different importance scores, and that's how it can distinguish proxy from facade, even if they use similar building blocks.
That's really neat, seeing how the sequence matters. So the big question, did it actually work well? What were the results?
Pretty impressive, actually. On their PyDesignNet dataset, they reported an accuracy of over 92%.
92%. That sounds high.
It is. And other metrics like precision and recall, basically, how often it's right when it identifies a pattern and how many of the actual patterns it finds were also above 92%. The tables in the TAPO break this down.
So it's generally very good at both finding the patterns and not making too many mistakes.
That's the picture, yes. They also looked at performance pattern by pattern.
Any patterns it found easier or harder?
Yeah, it did really well on some like composite interpreter, chain of responsibility. Others, like singleton or strategy, had slightly lower scores.
Why might that be?
Potentially because some patterns have overlapping features, making them harder to distinguish, or maybe imbalances in the training data having fewer examples of one pattern than another. They show a confusion matrix, a chart that visualizes where the model sometimes gets confused between patterns.
Makes sense. Some patterns are just inherently trickier or rarer.
Right. They also showed a learning curve, which indicated the model trained stably and wasn't just memorizing the data, suggesting it could generalize.
Okay, let's circle back to that language agnostic point.
Right.
How does that work in practice? You said the keywords used to create the sequences are language specific.
Yes, that initial step mapping source code keywords like class, def, return in Python, or their equivalents in Java to the generic characters in the sequence. That part is language specific. You need a different keyword map for each language.
Okay.
But the crucial thing is that the model itself only ever sees the generic language-independent sequences. It learns the patterns from that abstract representation.
Got it. So the pre-processing is tailored, but the core AI brain is universal.
Exactly. And this opens up possibilities like transfer learning training, a model mostly on Python data, say, and then having it work reasonably well on Java with minimal extra training, or maybe even zero extra training.
Zero-shot learning for design patterns. That'd be incredible.
It's a potential future direction they mention, yeah. Using even more advanced transformer architectures could help too.
Okay, this is super interesting for just understanding code. But you mentioned another paper takes this idea of a unified representation and applies it to improving code. Refactoring.
That's right. The paper on optimized design refactoring, or ODR, it tackles the challenge of automatically improving object-oriented software design.
Which is notoriously all to do well automatically.
Extremely. Traditional approaches often use search-based techniques. They try out different refactoring changes, like moving a method from one class to another.
Right.
But usually they have separate representations for the software itself, like the code or a model of it, and the potential changes, the solutions, and they constantly have to go back and forth.
Like propose a change
Yep.
and check if it's valid, then see how it affects the code quality metrics, and then propose another change.
Exactly. That validation and evaluation loop, as they show in one of their diagrams, takes a lot of time and computation, but doesn't directly find better designs. It's a bottleneck.
Okay, so what's the ODR framework's alternative?
It merges the representation of the software design and the potential refactoring solutions into one single thing, a complex vector.
Whoa, okay. Complex, like complex numbers from math.
Precisely. Complex numbers. They encode the entire object-oriented design classes, attributes, methods, their relationships into a single mathematical vector made up of complex numbers.
How on earth do you represent a class as a complex number?
It's quite intricate. They use the angle of the complex number to represent identities. One angle, theta, identifies the class. Another angle, phi, identifies a specific property, an attribute or method within that class.
Okay, angles for identity. What about the magnitude, the length of the number?
The magnitude can encode other information, like what type of property it is, attribute or method, and potentially information about its interactions or dependencies. They have diagrams illustrating this.
So each class becomes a set of these complex numbers, and the whole design is a big column matrix of them.
You got it. They walk through an example using the mediator pattern, showing step by step how a standard OO design gets transformed into this complex vector format.
The amazing part is,
The amazing part is they can then calculate standard software quality metrics like coupling between objects, CBO, or lack of cohesion in methods, LCOM, directly from mathematical operations on this vector.
no need to parse the code again or analyze a separate model, just math on the vector.
Just math on the vector. They show how CBO and LCOM calculations work using the vector components. It's incredibly efficient.
Okay, that's efficient for measuring quality.
Yeah.
How does it help improve it? How do they do the refactoring?
They apply optimization heuristics algorithms designed to search for the best solution in a complex space. The paper looks at 3 common ones: genetic algorithms, GA, particle swarm optimization, PSO, and simulated annealing, SA.
GAPSO-SA.
Yeah.
We hear about these in other optimization problems. How do they work with this complex vector?
Well, for PSO, you can imagine each possible design vector as a particle in a multidimensional space defined by the quality metrics you care about. The algorithm flies these particles around, adjusting their position, the vector, based on the best designs found so far.
So moving the particle means changing the design vector.
Right, often through specific mathematical operations like rotations of the complex numbers in the vector. Genetic algorithms create a population of design vectors and evolve them using crossover, mixing parts of 2 vectors, and mutation, making small, random changes.
Like breeding better designs.
Sort of. And simulated annealing starts with one design vector and iteratively explores neighboring designs, usually generated by small rotations, gradually cooling down to settle on a good solution.
And these rotations, they actually correspond to refactoring actions.
Yes, that's the key. They show that rotating a complex number representing a method or attribute effectively corresponds to moving that method or attribute to a different class. So the optimization algorithm, by finding the best vector mathematically, is implicitly suggesting concrete refactoring steps.
Wow. So it's not just an abstract score. The optimized vector tells you how to refactor.
Exactly. They ran experiments optimizing the CBO metric. All three heuristics, GA, PSO, SA, managed to find vectors representing designs with lower coupling. The GA, for instance, converged after about 90 generations.
And the final vector suggested specific moves.
Yes, the resulting optimized vector had specific complex number rotations that directly translated into recommendations like move method X from class A to class B actions a developer could take.
That's a huge leap from just saying, your coupling is too high.
It really is. And they compared this ODR approach to traditional search-based refactoring that uses separate representations, like abstract syntax trees or graphs.
This ODR was faster, less resource intensive.
Their results indicated significant improvements in both time and memory usage. Because the design and the potential solutions are unified, you skip that whole expensive back-and-forth validation step.
Makes perfect sense. Fewer moving parts, faster process.
Of course, it's not perfect. They acknowledge limitations.
Like what?
For instance, metrics that depend heavily on exact lines of code or on fine-grained details of encapsulation, public, private, protected, are harder to capture directly in the current complex vector representation.
Right. The extraction has trade-offs. You lose some low-level detail.
Exactly. It's a higher-level view focused on structure and relationships.
So what's next for these ideas? Where does the research go from here?
Both papers outline quite a few future directions. For pattern detection, they want to automate training data generation, push the boundaries of cross-language transfer learning, refine the analysis granularity, explore even more advanced AI techniques, and make the models more interpretable, explainable AI.
So we can understand why the model thinks something is a pattern.
Right, and for the optimized design refactoring.
Let me guess. Incorporating encapsulation, supporting more metrics.
You nailed it. Also supporting more types of refactoring actions, exploring different mathematical encodings or compression techniques, and trying out other optimization algorithms.
It really feels like these two threads, understanding patterns across languages and optimizing design via unified representations, could genuinely change things.
I agree. Being able to quickly understand complex multi-language systems is huge. And streamlining the refactoring process, making it more data-driven and less purely intuitive, that could save enormous amounts of time and effort.
So for you listening, the big takeaway is seeing how AI and these novel representations are tackling fundamental challenges in software engineering. Think about it. How might these automated analysis and refactoring tools change your own workflow or the way software teams operate in the future?
Definitely food for thought.
Yeah.
And if this sparked your interest, we absolutely recommend checking out the original research papers. There's a lot more detail in there.